So we just finished off talking about value, and the other thing in terms of design and design issues that I wanted to talk about here in Unit 6 is about what we call page structure and the kind of geometric organizations of paintings. We have already discussed this a little bit when we talked about shapes and shape grouping, and when we talked about hierarchy and emphasis, but I want to emphasize that just a little bit more explicitly. And so to start with, I want to begin with just a little bit of a discussion about human perception. When you look at a line, let's say like the edge of this painting, and for a second just think of this edge of the painting as not the edge, right, but just as a line, as if there isn't even a painting there, just a single line. When you look at a line like that, the human eye has the ability to see what is middle of that line pretty easily. Like if I put my cursor close to the midpoint, right, you have a sense of where that is, and if I move my cursor off from that midpoint, you're immediately aware that that's wrong, right, that is not midpoint, right? In fact, actually your eye is probably pretty good at figuring out where thirds are and also where quarters are, as well as where the half point is. And at the same time, our eye, whenever we look at any kind of rectangle, so we can see midpoints, but we can also see mid-angles. And because of that, we also naturally just see the diagonals that go from corner to corner. And we also naturally know exactly where that kind of intersection of those diagonals and the intersection of the horizontal and vertical is. And we have a sense as we look at a composition like this, even though we don't have to have it spelled out to us, we don't have to have a grid drawn over the top like this is, we can still see how this whole composition is organized around a triangle, but the triangle is slightly off from perfect center within this composition. But within that, though, still little baby right here, right, Jesus, is nestled in the geometry of where the perfect horizontal is, the perfect vertical, and the corner to corner diagonals going pretty much right through his head, right? And that's just telling us exactly what is the most important, most central thing in the painting. And we see this especially in Renaissance painting. We see compositions like this, especially triangular-based compositions, and triangular-based compositions that play off of the corner-to-corner diagonal just slightly. Like right here, we can see that as well with the Da Vinci. But we also see it in other periods of painting. We see it in Baroque painting and all kinds of periods of painting. Here are two compositions that are using that same idea. In this case, we're looking at St. Francis in Ecstasy here. The geometry of the page is actually a part of the story of the page. It's a part of the narrative. You can really see as you look at like these lines, right, as the geometry of this rock structure, you can see that he was aware of where that diagonal was. But you can especially see an awareness of this diagonal. You can see it in the way all this structure kind of follows that diagonal. You can see that in the way this arc kind of neatly kind of highlights this corner and this angle. But you can also see it in the fact that St. Francis is here standing and he's experiencing a moment of religious ecstasy where he is feeling kind of one with the divine. And in this moment, he is looking up to heaven, and we can almost feel, right, the direction, the intelligence of the universe directed at him, right at his heart. Well, it's interesting because what's going right through his heart is the corner-to-corner diagonal. So in a way, the geometry of the page, the math of the page, represents the divine. We can see similar use of diagonals here with Giotto. He's thinking about this composition as having, like, we have his own diagonal that he created that kind of leads us near to this moment. But if you look at the actual corner-to-corner diagonal, it brings us right to this intersection between Mary and Jesus, and really to the center meaning of the painting. It is the Lamentation. Here's another good example of the point I'm trying to make, which is how crucial geometric organization can be in painting. One of the things about this kind of geometry and the rules of it are that certain locations have the sense of feeling very consonant And because of that, they have the sense of feeling like when you place things in them, they feel very right and very carefully composed, and not like they need to, not um, like that they are very well placed. Let's go back just for a second to, right, you can definitely see that here in the Raphael. It works in a very different way here with the Poussin, because in the Poussin painting, based on the gestures of the figures and what's going on and the basic subject matter of the painting, um, that this is a very, this should be a very traumatic and a very cacophonous kind of image. And in some ways it is, but there is a stillness to this organization. Look at the way these figures create a triangle that fits so neatly into this corner and really play off of this corner diagonal, and how these two figures, right, are playing off of this diagonal. They're kind of like they're off from it, but they're almost like echoes of that corner to corner diagonal. But then even still, look at the way these figures back here in the back are lining up directly on that corner to corner diagonal. And not just those geometries, also perfect halves, perfect thirds are just kind of all over the place in the organization of this painting. This painting is very mathematical, and that makes it very still in a certain way, even as the image should not be still at all. Whereas here's almost like the opposite. Here is an image that is can be very quiet and could be quite still, but because the composition is very kind of loose when it relates to the diagonals, right? A loose play on what's going on the diagonals. Therefore, it is it has a much more kind of languorous and slow kind of feel to the composition. Here's a different kind of approach. Notice how so much of this is organized around, instead of thinking of this as a corner diagonal, which he is thinking about, he's also thinking of it as an arc, almost like the whole painting is bending. And then that arc becomes like this bow that's shooting Bacchus towards Ariadne. Once again, the more you look at it and the placement of objects, the more you notice that everything is very thoughtful about the geometry of the page. We just looked at this painting in the last lecture, and this is probably a good place to stop actually, because we're going to run out of time.